Welcome back to the shadows with angelical balance. Tonight, a bone-chilling Kentucky sheriff story that'll make you afraid of flashing blue lights forever. If you dare, smash subscribe, ring the bell, and drop a like. It keeps the nightmares coming. Lights off. Doors locked. The Kentucky Sheriff horror starts now. Sheriff Tom Brennan had been patrolling the back roads of Harlan County for 23 years, and he thought he'd seen everything these Kentucky hills had to offer. Meth labs hidden in abandoned coal mines, domestic disputes that ended in bloodshed, teenagers wrapping their cars around oak trees on moonless nights. The usual darkness that settles into small-town America when the factories close and hope dries up like a summer creek bed. But he'd never seen anything like what started happening in the winter of 2019. It began with the Hutchins boy going missing. Tom was sitting in his office at the county courthouse, nursing his third cup of coffee and working through a stack of paperwork when Deputy Lisa Chen knocked on his doorframe. She looked pale, which was unusual for Lisa. In the 4 years she'd been working under him, he'd never seen her rattled by much of anything. "Sheriff, we got a call from Martha Hutchins. Says her son didn't come home last night." Tom glanced at the clock on his wall. It was just past 8 in the morning. "How old's the boy?" 17. "Name's Dylan. She says he went out hunting yesterday afternoon, up in the state forest near Crumpler Ridge. Told her he'd be back before dark." Tom set down his coffee mug. Crumpler Ridge. That was rough country, all steep hollows and dense woods where cell phone signals went to die. Easy place for a teenager to get turned around, especially as winter days got shorter and darkness came early to these mountains. "Get Jimmy and Marcus. Tell them to gear up for a search. I'll talk to Martha." An hour later, Tom was standing in Martha Hutchins's kitchen while she wrung her hands and tried not to cry. She was a thin woman in her early 40s, worn down by years of working double shifts at the truck stop diner out on Highway 421. Dylan's father had died in a mining accident when the boy was 12, and Martha had raised him alone ever since. "He knows those woods, Sheriff," Martha said, her voice cracking. "Been hunting up there since he was old enough to hold a rifle. He wouldn't just get lost." Tom nodded, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm sure you're right, Martha. Probably just stayed out later than he planned and decided to camp for the night rather than try to navigate back in the dark. Smart thinking, if you ask me. We'll head up there now and bring him home." But even as he said it, something in his gut twisted. Maybe it was just the years of experience, the cop's intuition that developed after enough time on the job. Or maybe it was something about the way the morning light seemed dimmer than usual. The way the bare trees outside Martha's window looked like skeletal fingers clawing at a gray sky. The search party assembled at the trailhead just after 10 o'clock. Tom, Lisa, and deputies Jimmy Watts and Marcus Cole, along with 4 volunteers from the county's search and rescue team. They were good people, experienced in these mountains, and they spread out in a standard search pattern, calling Dylan's name as they climbed into the hills. The forest was quiet that day. Too quiet. Tom noticed it after the first hour. No birds singing, no squirrels rustling through the underbrush, just the crunch of boots on frozen leaves and the occasional gust of wind that moaned through the hollows like something in pain. They found Dylan's truck parked at an old logging road around noon. The driver's side door was unlocked, keys still in the ignition. His hunting rifle was in the back, along with a cooler and a backpack with some supplies. But no sign of Dylan himself. "Doesn't make sense," Jimmy said, scratching his head. "Why would he leave his rifle?" Tom circled the truck slowly, studying the ground. The earth was hard, not much in the way of tracks, but he could see boot prints heading off into the woods. He followed them for about 50 yards until they simply stopped at the base of a large oak tree. Just stopped. "Lisa, come look at this," Tom called. She jogged over, her breath coming out in white puffs. When she saw what he was looking at, or rather what he wasn't looking at, Her eyebrows knit together. "They just end," she said. "Yeah." Could the ground be too hard to hold prints? Tom knelt down, pressed his hand into the earth. It was frozen, sure, but not concrete hard. There should have been something. Boot prints, scuff marks, anything. Instead, there was just smooth ground, like it had been swept clean. They searched until dark, covering a 3-mile radius from the truck. They called Dylan's name until their voices went hoarse. They found nothing. No more tracks, no signs of struggle, no dropped items or torn clothing. It was like Dylan Hutchins had simply walked 50 yards into the forest and vanished into thin air. As they hiked back down the mountain in the fading light, Tom felt the weight of dread settling in his chest. In 23 years of law enforcement, he'd worked missing person cases before, but this felt different. This felt wrong. That night, lying in bed next to his wife Sarah, Tom stared at the ceiling and couldn't shake the image of those boot prints just ending at the base of that tree. Sarah asked him if he was okay, and he told her yes, just tired from the search. But that wasn't true. He wasn't tired. He was disturbed in a way he couldn't quite articulate.
Around 2 in the morning, he finally drifted off to sleep, and he dreamed of the forest. In his dream, the trees were taller, stretching up into an infinite darkness. And there, walking between the trunks, were figures. Tall, impossibly thin figures that moved with a strange, jerking gait. And they were watching him with eyes that glowed like distant stars. He woke with a gasp, his heart hammering in his chest. The search continued for 3 more days. They brought in dogs, which immediately became agitated and refused to follow any scent trail. They brought in a helicopter from the state police, which spotted nothing but endless winter forest. They interviewed everyone who knew Dylan, looking for any hint that he might have run away or hurt himself. But everyone said the same thing. Dylan was a good kid. No drugs, no depression, no reason to disappear. On the 4th day, Tom was back in his office when he got a call from old Ezra Stone. Ezra was in his 80s, a retired coal miner who lived alone in a cabin about 5 miles from where Dylan had vanished. He was one of those mountain people who'd been born in these hills and would die in them, part of a dying breed that still remembered the old ways, the old stories. "Sheriff, you need to come out here," Ezra said, his voice raspy with age and cigarettes. "Found something you ought to see." Tom drove out to Ezra's place, a weather-beaten cabin that looked like it might collapse in the next strong wind. The old man was waiting on the porch, bundled in a thick coat, a hunting rifle resting against the railing beside him. "Thanks for coming, Sheriff," Ezra said. "Didn't want to talk about this over the phone. People might think I'm crazy." "What did you find, Ezra?" The old man's eyes were serious, set deep in a face carved by decades of hard living. "Follow me." They walked into the woods behind Ezra's cabin, trudging through snow that had fallen the night before. After about 20 minutes, Ezra stopped at a small clearing and pointed. Tom felt his blood run cold. There, arranged in a perfect circle about 30 feet across, were 7 dead deer. They were placed with their heads pointing inward toward the center of the circle, their bodies still and stiff with rigor mortis. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that each deer had been completely drained of blood. Their eyes were gone too, just empty sockets staring at nothing. "Found this yesterday morning," Ezra said quietly. "Been hunting these woods for 60 years, Sheriff. Never seen nothing like it." Tom walked slowly around the circle, his mind racing. No blood on the ground, no tracks, no signs of predation. Just 7 bloodless deer arranged with disturbing precision. "Ezra," Tom said carefully, "you ever heard stories about this kind of thing? Old stories, I mean, from your grandparents or their grandparents?" The old man was quiet for a long moment, staring at the dead deer. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "My grandfather, he told me things the old-timers used to talk about, back before the coal companies came, back when these mountains were wild and people knew to respect what lived in the deep places. He told me about the tall walkers." "The what?" "The tall walkers. Said they lived in the bones of the mountains, in caves that went down forever. Said they were older than the Cherokee, older than the trees themselves. Most of the time they stayed deep, stayed hidden. But sometimes, when conditions were right, when the winter was hard and the moon was dark, they came up. They took things. Animals. Sometimes people. Tom wanted to dismiss it as superstition, the kind of folklore that sprung up in isolated communities. But standing there in that clearing, looking at 7 bloodless deer arranged in a perfect circle, he found he couldn't quite manage the dismissal.
Your grandfather ever say what they wanted? Why they took things? Ezra's face was grim. He said they were hungry, Sheriff. Always hungry. Not for meat, not for blood exactly. For something else. Something in us. He said they ate the life itself, drained it out and took it down into the dark with them. Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Did he say how to stop them? No, Ezra said. He said you couldn't stop them. You could only wait for them to go back down, back to sleep, and pray they didn't take anyone you loved before they did. That night, Tom sat at his kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey and his laptop, searching for any information about tall walkers or similar legends in Kentucky folklore. He found scattered references, obscure mentions in collections of Appalachian ghost stories, a few academic papers about pre-Columbian mythology. Nothing concrete, nothing that would hold up in a court of law or even in a rational conversation. But there was one thing that caught his attention. A newspaper article from 1952, scanned and uploaded to a historical archive. The headline read, 12 missing in Harlan County, sheriff baffled. Tom read the article 3 times. In January 1952, 12 people had disappeared from the Harlan County area over the course of 2 weeks. Men, women, and children, all vanished without a trace. Search parties found nothing. The disappearances stopped as suddenly as they'd started, and no explanation was ever found. He looked at the dates, January 15th through January 28th, 1952. Then he pulled up a calendar and counted backward. The article was from 73 years ago, almost exactly. He grabbed a piece of paper and did the math, his hand shaking slightly as he wrote. If something was operating on a cycle, and that was a big if, the rational part of his mind insisted, then based on the patterns in the article, the disappearances happened every...
He stared at the number he'd written down. 73 years. And if that pattern held, if there was any truth to it at all, then the cycle had just started again. Dylan Hutchins had been the first. Tom picked up his phone and called Lisa. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice heavy with sleep. Sheriff, it's almost midnight. What's wrong? I need you to pull every missing person report filed in Harlan County going back 100 years, he said. I know it's a strange request, but I need to see the dates, Lisa. All the dates. There was a pause. Okay, she said slowly. Can I ask why? Just a hunch. Can you get it done tomorrow? Sure, I'll have it by noon. Thanks, Lisa. And one more thing. Be careful out there. If anyone calls in anything weird, and I mean anything, I want to know about it immediately. Sheriff, you're scaring me a little bit here. Tom looked out his kitchen window at the dark mountains beyond, silhouetted against the starless sky. Good, he said. Maybe we should be scared. Lisa delivered the files just after 11 the next morning. She set a thick folder on Tom's desk, her face troubled. I found something, she said. And Sheriff, it's weird. Tom opened the folder and began leafing through the reports. Lisa had done excellent work, organizing everything by date, going back to 1876, when the county had started keeping proper records. Look at the patterns, Lisa said, leaning over to point. January 1879, 6 people went missing over 2 weeks. January 1952, 12 people. January 1925, 8 people. And here, January 1898, 4 people. It's always January, always over a period of about 2 to 3 weeks, and always in the same general area, the north part of the county, up in the mountain forests. Tom felt his stomach turn. The pattern was undeniable. Every 73 years, give or take a few months.
like clockwork stretching back over a century.
There's more, Lisa said quietly. I called the state archives in Frankfurt this morning, asked them to check older records. They found references to disappearances in 1806. 5 people vanished from what was then just a wilderness settlement. And before that, there are Cherokee oral histories that mention people going into the mountains and never returning during the time of long shadows, every 73 years. Tom sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. How many people went missing total in each cycle? It varies, between 4 and 14. But Sheriff, she hesitated, we're only 5 days into this cycle. If the pattern holds, we could lose more people, a lot more. Before Tom could respond, his radio crackled to life. It was Jimmy, and his voice was tight with tension. Sheriff, we got another one. Rebecca Moss, age 42. Her husband says she went out to their barn last night around 8 to check on their horses, never came back inside. He waited until morning, thinking maybe she'd fallen asleep in the tack room. She does that sometimes after a long day. But she's not there. She's nowhere. Tom grabbed his keys. Lisa, you're with me. Jimmy, secure the scene. Don't let anyone touch anything. The Moss farm was a 20-minute drive into the hills, a modest spread with a house, a barn, and 40 acres of pasture. Jim Moss met them in the driveway, a big man in his 50s with red-rimmed eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I should have checked sooner, he said, his voice breaking. I should have gone out there when she didn't come back in. But we'd had an argument earlier about money, stupid stuff, and I thought maybe she just wanted some space. Oh God, I should have checked. It's not your fault, Jim, Tom said, though the words felt hollow. Show us where you last saw her. The barn was well maintained, the horses nickering softly in their stalls. Everything looked normal.
Rebecca's coat was hanging on a hook by the door. Her boots were lined up neatly on a mat. The lights were on. Tom walked the barn slowly, looking for anything out of place. In the back, near the feed room, he found it. A single muddy footprint, Rebecca's shoe size, pointing toward the rear door of the barn. The door that led out to the back pasture and then to the tree line beyond. They followed the trail outside. Like with Dylan Hutchins, the footprints went for about 30 yards across the frozen ground, heading toward the forest, and then they just stopped. No sign of struggle, no blood, nothing disturbed. Just empty ground where a person should have been. This is impossible, Jimmy muttered, standing at the spot where the tracks ended. People don't just disappear into thin air. But Tom was looking at the tree line, at the dark spaces between the trunks, and he was remembering Ezra's words. They lived in the bones of the mountains. They came up. They took things. Spread out, he ordered. Search the woods. Anything unusual, you call it in. They searched for hours, but Tom knew they wouldn't find anything. Whatever had taken Rebecca Moss had left no trace, just like with Dylan. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the pasture, Tom called off the search for the day. Back at the station, he gathered his deputies in the conference room. Lisa, Jimmy, and Marcus sat around the table, looking exhausted and confused. I need to tell you something, Tom said, and I need you to keep an open mind. He laid out everything, the historical patterns of disappearances, Ezra's story about the tall walkers, the 73-year cycle. He showed them the newspaper articles, the old reports, the undeniable evidence that something was happening in these mountains, something that defied rational explanation. When he finished, the room was silent. Jimmy looked skeptical, Marcus looked uncomfortable, but Lisa was nodding slowly.
My grandmother was Cherokee, she said quietly. She told me stories when I was little, about things in the mountains that were here before people. She called them the Tsunsti, the little people, but she said there were others too, bigger things, darker things. She said they lived deep in the earth and only came up when they were hungry. You believe this? Marcus asked, his voice strained. Really? I believe 2 people are missing, Lisa said. I believe the evidence shows a pattern going back almost 200 years, and I believe we need to figure out what's happening before more people disappear. Tom looked around the table. Here's what we're going to do. We put out a county-wide alert. Nobody goes into the forests alone, especially after dark. We tell people there's a dangerous situation. Maybe say we're looking for an escaped convict or something. We don't mention the tall walkers or any of the historical stuff. We'd lose all credibility. But we keep people away from the woods. And if they ask why the state police aren't involved, Jimmy asked, we tell them we've requested backup and it's coming. In the meantime, we patrol. We keep watch. And if we see anything at all that might explain what's happening, we investigate. That night, Tom drove out to Ezra's cabin again. The old man was sitting on his porch despite the cold, bundled in blankets, his rifle across his lap. "Sheriff," Ezra said by way of greeting. "Figured you'd be back." "Another one's gone. Rebecca Moss." Ezra nodded slowly, like he'd expected this. "It's starting then. The taking." Tom climbed the porch steps and leaned against the railing. "Your grandfather, did he say anything else about these things? Anything that might help us?" Ezra was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark forest. "He said they hunted at night, said they were tall as trees and thin as shios. Said they moved between the trees like smoke, and you couldn't see them unless they wanted you to. He said they made a sound, a kind of clicking noise, like bones rubbing together. And he said if you heard that sound, you ran, and you didn't look back." "Did anyone ever survive an encounter with them?" "My grandfather did. He was hunting deer one winter night when he heard the clicking, looked up and saw one of them standing at the edge of the trees. He said it was maybe 12 feet tall, with arms that hung down to its knees and a head that wasn't quite right, eyes like stars in the dark. It just stood there, watching him. He fired his rifle at it, and it just faded away, like mist. He ran all the way home and didn't go back into those woods for a year." Tom felt a chill run down his spine. Why didn't it take him? He didn't know. Said maybe it wasn't hungry enough yet, or maybe it was just looking, scouting. They were smart, he said. Smarter than any animal. Smart enough to plan. Is there any way to kill them? Ezra laughed. A dry, humorless sound. You can't kill what's already dead, Sheriff. That's what my grandfather said. These things aren't alive. Not like you and me. There's something else. Something older. Tom drove home through empty streets, past houses with their lights burning against the darkness. He thought about all the people in those houses, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the horror that was waking up in the mountains around them. When he got home, Sarah was waiting up for him. She took one look at his face and poured him a whiskey without asking. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Worse," Tom replied. He wanted to tell her everything, to unburden himself of the terrible knowledge he was carrying. But what would he say? That ancient creatures from Native American legends were hunting in the Kentucky hills. That people were being taken by things that shouldn't exist. Instead, he just said, "It's a tough case. Multiple missing persons." Sarah knew him too well to buy the deflection, but she didn't push. She just sat with him in the kitchen while he drank his whiskey and stared at nothing. Around 2 a.m, Tom's phone rang. It was Marcus, and his voice was shaking. "Sheriff, you need to get down to the station, now." "What's wrong?" Just get here, please." Tom dressed quickly and drove through the empty streets. The station was lit up like Christmas, and Marcus's patrol car was parked haphazardly out front, like he'd arrived in a hurry. Inside, Marcus was sitting at his desk, his face pale. On his computer screen was footage from his dash cam. "I was doing a patrol up near Crumpler Ridge," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Around midnight, I saw something. Watch." He pressed play. The footage showed a dark forest road, the patrol car's headlights cutting through the night. Everything was normal for about 30 seconds. Then, at the edge of the headlight beam, something moved. Tom leaned closer to the screen. At first, it looked like a tree, but then it moved again, and Tom realized it wasn't a tree at all. It was tall, impossibly tall, maybe 12 or 13 feet. Its body was thin, almost skeletal, with long arms that hung down past his knees. And as the headlights swept across it, Tom caught a glimpse of its head. It was elongated, too large for the body, with a mouth that seemed to split the lower half of the face. And the eyes, Tom's breath caught in his throat, the eyes glowed with a pale, sickly light. The creature stood there for maybe 3 seconds, perfectly still, staring directly at the camera. Then it moved, and the speed was all wrong. It didn't walk or run. It just shifted like it had folded space, and suddenly it was gone, vanished between the trees. Marcus stopped the video. His hands were trembling.
"Tell me I didn't see that," he said.
tell me that was a trick of the light or a deer or something. Anything. But Tom couldn't tell him that, because he'd seen it too, and it matched Ezra's description perfectly. The tall walkers were real, and they were hunting. Tom stood up, his mind racing. We need to call an emergency town meeting tomorrow night at the high school. Get the word out. Everyone needs to be there. What are we going to tell them? Marcus asked. The truth, Tom said, or as much of it as they'll believe. We're going to tell them something dangerous is in those mountains, and until we deal with it, nobody goes into the woods. Nobody. And if they don't believe us? Tom thought about the footage on the screen, about Dylan Hutchins and Rebecca Moss, about the pattern of disappearances stretching back 2 centuries. He thought about the clicking sound Ezra had described, and the hunger that drove these creatures up from whatever depths they inhabited. Then God help us all, he said. The next morning, Tom sent Lisa to personally visit every household in the north part of the county, warning them to stay inside after dark and to avoid the forests. He sent Jimmy to talk to the local news station to put out a general alert without mentioning the real reason. And he sat in his office reviewing the dashcam footage over and over, trying to understand what they were up against. Around noon, his phone rang. It was the county hospital. Sheriff Brennan, this is Dr. Harrison. You need to come down here. We have a patient who's asking for you. Says she has information about the disappearances. Who is it? Name's Anna Whitfield. She's, well, you should just come see for yourself. Tom found Anna Whitfield in a private room on the 2nd floor. She was in her 70s, a thin woman with wild gray hair and eyes that darted nervously around the room. Dr. Harrison stood by the door, his expression grave.
Anna was found wandering on Highway 421 this morning, the doctor said quietly. Hypothermic, dehydrated, and suffering from what appears to be extreme psychological trauma. She keeps talking about things in the woods, things that took her husband. Tom approached the bed slowly. Mrs. Whitfield? I'm Sheriff Brennan. Can you tell me what happened? Anna's eyes locked onto his, and Tom saw a terror there that made his blood run cold. Came for us, she whispered. Last night. We were in our cabin up on Pine Mountain. We heard the clicking, like bones. Then the lights went out, and they were outside. Tall shadows against the windows. My husband, Earl, he told me to hide in the cellar. He got his gun. I heard him shouting, heard the gunshots. Then screaming. Then nothing. How did you get away? I stayed in the cellar until morning. When I came out, Earl was gone. The front door was wide open. There was no blood, no sign of struggle. Just gone. I ran. I just ran. Tom felt sick. Did you see them? Did you see what they looked like? Anna's face crumbled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I saw one. When I was running through the woods at first light, it was standing between the trees, watching me. It was so tall, Sheriff, taller than any man, and its face, she shuddered violently. Its face was wrong, too long, too many teeth, and its eyes, oh God, its eyes were like looking into nothing, like staring into death itself. Why didn't it take you? I don't know. Maybe because it was getting light, maybe because it already had what it wanted, or maybe, she grabbed Tom's arm with surprising strength, maybe it wanted me to tell everyone. Maybe it wants us to be afraid. Tom stayed with Anna until she fell into an exhausted sleep, then met Dr. Harrison in the hallway. Is she going to be okay? Tom asked. The doctor shook his head slowly. Physically, she'll recover, but mentally.
Sheriff, I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I've never seen trauma like this. Whatever she saw out there, it broke something in her. Something fundamental. That evening, the Harlan County High School gymnasium was packed. Nearly 200 people crowded into the bleachers and folding chairs, their faces anxious and confused. Tom stood at a podium at center court, his deputies flanking him, and looked out at his community. He saw families he'd known for decades. He saw children who should have been safe, protected, unaware of the horror that lurked in the mountains around them. And he knew he had to tell them the truth, even if they didn't believe him. "Thank you all for coming," Tom began. "I know this is unusual, but we have a serious situation that requires everyone's cooperation and vigilance." He laid out the facts. 3 people missing in the past week. No evidence, no explanations. A pattern of similar disappearances going back 200 years. Then, taking a deep breath, he showed them the dashcam footage. The gymnasium fell silent as the tall, skeletal figure appeared on the screen projected against the wall. Tom heard gasps, heard someone crying. When the footage ended, the silence stretched on. Finally, someone in the back stood up. It was Pete Chambers, a logger who'd worked these mountains all his life. "Sheriff, are you telling us there's some kind of creature out there? Like Bigfoot or something?" "I'm telling you there's something dangerous in these woods," Tom said carefully. "Something we don't fully understand. I'm asking all of you to stay away from the forests, especially after dark. Stay in groups. Keep your doors and windows locked."
Until we can figure out what's happening and how to stop it, we need to be extremely careful. "This is insane," someone else shouted. "You're asking us to believe in monsters?" "I'm asking you to believe in the evidence," Tom replied. "I'm asking you to believe in the people who've gone missing. And I'm asking you to trust me when I say the safest thing you can do right now is stay close to town and avoid being alone in remote areas." The meeting descended into chaos after that. People arguing, people afraid, people angry. But underneath it all, Tom could see belief creeping in. They'd seen the footage, they knew people were missing. And deep down, in the part of human consciousness that still remembered when we were prey and not predators, they recognized the truth. There was something in the mountains, something old, something hungry, and it was hunting them. That night, Tom set up a command center in the station, running on coffee and adrenaline. He had his deputies working in shifts, monitoring reports, coordinating with volunteers who'd set up watch points throughout the county. The town was scared, but at least they were alert. Around 3 a.m, Tom was studying old survey maps of the county, trying to find a pattern to where the disappearances occurred, when Lisa came into his office. "Sheriff, I found something. You remember how I said my grandmother told me stories about the little people and other things in the mountains?" Tom nodded, setting down his coffee. "I called my aunt tonight. She's the keeper of family stories, knows all the old Cherokee legends. I told her what was happening, and she went quiet for a long time. Then she said there are old stories about the Nunihi, spirit people who live inside the mountains. But there's another legend, older and darker. The Tsul'kalu."
The Slant-Eyed Giant. Tell me about it. Lisa sat down, pulling out a notebook covered in her handwriting. The Cherokee believed that Tsul'kalu lived in the deepest caves, in places where the mountain roots go down so far they touch the bones of the world. They were guardians of those deep places, but they weren't benevolent. They were hunger given form. The stories say they emerged every few generations to feed, taking people into the darkness below. The Cherokee learned to recognize the signs, the silence of the forest, the circle of dead animals, the clicking sound in the night. How did they survive? How did they deal with these things? They didn't fight them. They couldn't. The Tsul'kalu were too powerful, too ancient. Instead, they performed rituals, offerings to appease them, and they waited. Eventually, the creatures would take enough to satisfy their hunger and retreat back into the earth. The cycle would complete, and there would be peace again for several lifetimes. Tom rubbed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. How many did they usually take? Lisa's expression was grim. My aunt said the old stories mentioned anywhere from 7 to 14 souls. Once the hunger was satisfied, the Tsul'kalu returned to their sleep. We've lost 3 people so far. Earl Whitfield is probably dead even though we haven't found a body. That means they need at least 3 more. Maybe 10 more.
Sheriff, there might be a way to protect people. The Cherokee used sacred fires, burning specific herbs and woods. They believed the smoke created barriers that Tsul'kalu wouldn't cross. And they never went into the forest alone during the taking times. They stayed together, in groups, with fires burning all night. It wasn't much, but it was something. Tom immediately taught on the phone, waking up the mayor and the county emergency coordinator. Within hours, they had a plan.
Large bonfires would be set up at strategic points around the more isolated communities. Families living in remote areas would be encouraged to come into town and stay at the high school, which they'd convert into a temporary shelter. And nobody, absolutely nobody, would be alone in the dark. By dawn, the plan was in motion. Tom watched as volunteers hauled wood to fire sites, as families packed their cars and drove into town. The high school gymnasium filled with cots and sleeping bags, children confused and parents frightened, but alive. But Tom knew it wouldn't be enough. The tall walkers, the Tsul'kalu, had been hunting these mountains for centuries. They were patient, they were intelligent, and they were very, very good at what they did. On the morning of the 8th day since Dylan Hutchins disappeared, Tom got a call from a trucker named Ray Holland. Ray had been driving through the county on Highway 421 when he saw something that made him pull over and call the sheriff. "There's a car off the road up here, Sheriff. Driver's door is open, engine's still running, but there's no driver. And Sheriff, there's blood on the seat." Tom and Jimmy arrived within 15 minutes. The car belonged to Michael Santos, a 28-year-old teacher from the high school. According to his wife, who Tom called immediately, Michael had left their house in town at 6:30 that morning to drive to his parents' place in the next county. He never arrived. The scene was wrong in every way. The car had clearly gone off the road, the front bumper crumpled against a tree, but the damage was minimal. This wasn't a high-speed crash. It was like the car had slowly drifted off the pavement and coasted to a stop. The driver's door hung open, and on the seat was a smear of blood. But it was what Jimmy found in the back seat that made Tom's skin crawl. Scratches.
4 long parallel gouges in the leather upholstery, like someone or something had reached in from behind and dragged its claws across the seat. "Sheriff," Jimmy said, his voice tight, "look at the angle of these scratches. Whatever made them was reaching down from above, like it was on the roof of the car." Tom examined the roof. There were indentations in the metal, 4 on each side, like something had gripped the car with impossibly strong fingers. And there, barely visible in the morning light, were marks that might have been footprints, long, narrow impressions in the frost on the roof, as if something had been crouching there. They found Michael's body 50 yards into the woods, or what was left of it. Tom had seen death before, car accidents, hunting mishaps, the aftermath of violence, but this was different. This was something out of a nightmare. Michael's body was drained, just like the deer in Ezra's clearing. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were gone. But worse than that were the wounds. Long, thin cuts all over his body, precise and surgical, like he'd been opened up and everything of value had been carefully removed. And there was no blood, not on the ground, not on his clothes, just those terrible wounds and empty eye sockets staring at the gray sky. Jimmy turned away and vomited. Tom couldn't blame him. "We need to get this body to the county morgue," Tom said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "And we need to keep this quiet. If people see what was done to him, we'll have mass panic." But word got out anyway. It always did in small towns. By that evening, everyone knew that Michael Santos had been found mutilated in the woods, though the details remained mercifully vague. The high school shelter swelled with more families, people too terrified to stay in their homes. The grocery store was mobbed with people buying supplies, preparing to barricade themselves inside.
Tom stood in the station that night, looking at a map of the county with pins marking each disappearance. Dylan Hutchins, Rebecca Moss, Earl Whitfield, Michael Santos. 4 pins. 4 lives taken. And if the historical pattern held, there would be more. He was so focused on the map that he didn't hear Lisa come in until she spoke. "Sheriff, I've been thinking about the pattern, about where the disappearances happened." Tom turned. Lisa's eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion, but there was a fierce intelligence burning in them. "They're not random," she continued, placing her own map on the desk. "Look, I've marked every disappearance from every cycle going back to 1806. They form a pattern." Tom studied the map. She was right. The disappearances clustered in specific areas, and when you connected them,
They form rough lines radiating out from a central point deep in the mountains. It's like spokes on a wheel, Lisa said, and the center is here. She pointed to a spot in the most remote part of the county, an area of steep hollows and dense forest that didn't even have proper roads. Cave Hollow. That's what the old maps call it. Why Cave Hollow? Because there's supposed to be a cave system there. A big one. The Cherokee considered it sacred ground. No one was allowed to enter. When the white settlers came, a few tried to explore it. Most came back talking about passages that went down forever, about sounds in the dark. A couple never came back at all. Eventually, people just stopped going there. Tom felt a cold certainty settling over him. That's where they live. That's where they come from. I think so. And if we want to stop this, we need to go there. Absolutely not, Tom said immediately. That's suicide. Sheriff, 4 people are dead. If we wait for the cycle to complete naturally, we could lose 10 more. Families, kids.
Can we really just sit here and let that happen? Tom wanted to say yes, wanted to argue that their job was to protect the people in town, not to go chasing monsters into their lair. But he looked at the map, at those 4 pins, and he thought about the empty eye sockets of Michael Santos's corpse. "What are you suggesting?" he asked quietly. "We go in during daylight, we find the cave entrance, we explore carefully, and we figure out what we're dealing with. Maybe there's a way to collapse the entrance, seal them in. Or maybe we find something down there that explains how to stop them. That's a lot of maybes. It's all we've got." Tom was quiet for a long moment, weighing the options. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but we do this smart. We go in armed, we go in prepared, and at the first sign of real danger, we get out. And it's just you and me. I'm not risking any more lives than necessary." "What about Ezra? He knows these mountains better than anyone, and he's seen one of these things and survived." Tom thought about the old man sitting on his porch with his rifle, keeping watch over woods that held ancient horrors. "All right, we ask Ezra. But if he says no, we respect that." They drove out to Ezra's cabin at first light the next morning. The old man was already awake, coffee brewing on an ancient stove. When Tom explained what they wanted to do, Ezra was quiet for a long time. "You know this is probably a one-way trip," he finally said. "We know. And you know that even if you find these things, you might not be able to kill them." "We know that too." Ezra nodded slowly. "All right then, I'll take you. Been meaning to see Cave Hollow again before I die anyway. Might as well be now." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Flashlights, rope, weapons, though Tom wasn't sure how effective guns would be against creatures that were potentially thousands of years old.
They told Marcus and Jimmy where they were going and what to do if they didn't come back by sunset. Marcus argued, wanted to come with them, but Tom was firm. Someone had to stay behind to protect the town. At noon they set out. Ezra led them along forgotten trails and game paths, deeper into the mountains than Tom had ever been. The forest here was old, the trees massive and twisted, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even in daylight it was dim and shadowed. They walked for 3 hours, climbing steadily upward, and then the terrain changed. The trees thinned out, and they found themselves in a narrow hollow between 2 steep ridges. At the far end, half hidden by brush and fallen logs, was a dark opening in the rock face. "Cave Hollow," Ezra said quietly. "Been 60 years since I was here last. Thought I'd never come back." The entrance was maybe 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, a jagged mouth that seemed to swallow light. Tom clicked on his flashlight and stepped forward, but Ezra grabbed his arm. "Listen," the old man said. They stood in silence. At first, Tom heard nothing but the wind in the trees. Then, faintly, from deep within the cave, came a sound. Click, 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 like bones rubbing together in the dark. "They're down there," Lisa whispered. "They're home." Tom's every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to get away from this place as fast as possible. But he thought about Dylan Hutchins, probably lying dead in some dark passage below. He thought about Rebecca Moss and Earl Whitfield and Michael Santos. He thought about the 10 more people who might die if they did nothing. "Let's go," he said, and stepped into the darkness.
The cave entrance led to a passage that sloped downward, the walls rough and damp. Their flashlight beams cut through the blackness, revealing stone formations that looked almost deliberately carved, though Tom knew they had to be natural.
The clicking sound grew louder as they descended, echoing off the walls in a way that made it impossible to tell which direction it came from. After about 50 yards, the passage opened into a larger chamber. Tom swept his light around and felt his breath catch in his throat. The chamber was huge, maybe 100 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadow above them. But it was what was on the walls that made his blood run cold. Markings, thousands of them. Some looked like writing, but in no alphabet Tom had ever seen. Others were pictographs, crude drawings of tall, thin figures surrounding groups of smaller human shapes. And everywhere, carved over and over into the stone, was the same symbol. A circle with radiating lines, like a sun or a star. Cherokee didn't make these, Ezra said, his voice barely above a whisper. These are older, much older. Lisa was examining one section of wall, her flashlight illuminating a particularly detailed carving. It showed a tall figure standing in what looked like a pool of liquid, with smaller human figures being led toward it in a line. I think this shows the feeding, she said. They bring the victims here, to this chamber. They drain them, and they take the life force, or whatever it is, down deeper into the earth. Tom's light found an opening on the far side of the chamber, a passage that led downward at a steep angle. Unlike the natural cave formations they'd passed through, this passage looked deliberately carved, the walls smooth and regular. That's where they go, he said. That's where they take their victims. The clicking sound was coming from that passage, louder now, and Tom thought he could hear something else beneath it, a low, resonant humming, like the sound of a vast machine deep underground.
"We should mark this location and leave," Lisa said, her voice tight. "We can come back with more people, with equipment." But even as she said it, Tom knew that wasn't going to happen, because the clicking had stopped. And in the sudden silence, he could hear something moving in the darkness ahead. Something big. Tom raised his rifle, his heart hammering. "Get behind me, both of you." The thing that emerged from the passage made every nightmare Tom had ever had seem tame by comparison. It was at least 12 feet tall, its body skeletal and elongated, covered in what looked like smooth, pale skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands with too many fingers, each one tipped with a claw like black glass. But it was the head that truly horrified him. The skull was too long, almost horse-like, but with a mouth that split horizontally across the lower half of the face. When that mouth opened, Tom saw rows of thin, needle-like teeth, and the eyes, 2 sets of them, one above the other, glowed with a pale, sickly luminescence. The creature tilted its head, studying them with an intelligence that was worse than any animal hunger. It made the clicking sound again, and Tom realized it was coming from those teeth, snapping together in a rapid rhythm. Then it spoke. The voice was wrong, layered with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from any throat. It spoke in a language Tom didn't know, but somehow he understood the meaning. Ancient. Hungry. Mine. "Run," Tom said. They ran. Tom fired his rifle as they fled, the shots deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. He didn't know if the bullets even hit the creature, didn't dare look back. They scrambled up the sloping passage, their flashlights bouncing wildly, and behind them came the sound of movement. Not running, but that terrible sliding, shifting motion as the creature folded space and distance. They burst out of the cave entrance into late afternoon sun that seemed impossibly bright. Tom spun, aiming his rifle back into the darkness, but nothing emerged. The entrance gaped like an open wound, but the thing stayed inside. "It won't come out," Ezra gasped, bent over with his hands on his knees. "Sunlight. They can't take the sunlight." They stood there for several minutes, catching their breath, waiting to see if the creature would follow. But it didn't. Eventually, they began the long hike back to Ezra's truck, none of them speaking. What was there to say? They had found the source of the horror. They had looked into the face of something that shouldn't exist, and now they knew there was no fighting these things, no stopping them. All they could do was wait for the hunger to be satisfied and pray they weren't next to be taken. Tom didn't sleep that night. He sat in his living room with all the lights on, his rifle across his lap, replaying the encounter in the cave over and over in his mind. That voice,
those eyes, the casual, predatory intelligence behind them. These weren't mindless monsters. They were ancient, deliberate hunters who understood their prey better than the prey understood themselves. Sarah had given up trying to get him to come to bed around midnight. She sat with him instead, holding his hand, not asking questions she knew he couldn't answer. Around 3 a.m, his phone rang. It was Marcus, and there was barely controlled panic in his voice. "Sheriff, they took Jenny Price, right out of the shelter at the high school." Tom was on his feet instantly. "That's impossible. There are 200 people there. How could—" "I don't know, Sheriff, but she's gone. Her daughter woke up screaming, said something reached down from the ceiling and pulled her mother up into the darkness. We searched the entire building, every room, every closet. There's no sign of her."
"But, Sheriff," Marcus's voice broke, "there are claw marks on the ceiling tiles, and they lead to the air vents." Tom felt his blood turn to ice. The creatures had adapted. They'd learned. If people gathered in groups, in buildings, the Tsul'kalu would find other ways to reach them. Nowhere was safe. By dawn, the town was in full panic. People barricaded themselves in their homes, refused to go to work, pulled their children out of school. The high school shelter emptied as families decided they'd rather take their chances in their own houses than in a building where something could reach down from the ceiling and take them. Tom called an emergency meeting with his deputies and the county officials. The mayor, a nervous man named Harold Pritchard, was nearly hysterical. "We need to evacuate," Harold said. "The whole county. Get everyone out until this is over." "Evacuate to where?" Tom asked. "The next county? What makes you think these things respect county lines? What makes you think they won't just follow?" "Then what do you suggest, Sheriff? Because right now 5 people are dead and the entire town is terrified." Tom looked at Lisa, who gave him a small nod. They discussed this on the drive back from Cave Hollow yesterday. There was only one option left, and it was desperate. "We give them what they want," Tom said quietly. The room went silent. "Excuse me?" Harold said. "The historical pattern shows they take between 7 and 14 people per cycle. We've lost 5. Dylan, Rebecca, Earl, Michael, and now Jenny. That means they need between 2 and 9 more. Once they've fed enough, they retreat back into the earth for another 73 years. "You're suggesting we just let them take more people?" Jimmy asked, his voice incredulous. "No," Tom said. "I'm suggesting we offer them something else, something that satisfies their hunger without costing more lives." "Like what?" Tom took a deep breath. "Me. Us." "We go into that cave and we confront them. We offer ourselves as the final offerings. But we negotiate. We make sure they understand that after they take us, the hunting stops. They go back to sleep." "That's insane," Harold said. "You can't negotiate with monsters." "They're not monsters," Lisa interjected. "They're intelligent. Ancient, yes. Alien to us, absolutely. But they communicate. They understand. The Cherokee legends say offerings were made, rituals performed. That implies some kind of exchange, some kind of understanding." "And what makes you think they'll honor any agreement?" Marcus asked. "Because they've done it before." Ezra's voice came from the doorway. The old man had arrived without anyone noticing, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "Every 73 years, they take their due and then they sleep. They could take more if they wanted. They could come up every year, every month, but they don't. That means they follow rules, even if we don't understand them, and rules can be negotiated." Tom looked around the room at the faces of people he'd known for years, his friends, his colleagues, his community. They were scared, they were desperate, and they were out of options. "I'm not ordering anyone to come with me," Tom said, "but I'm going back to that cave tonight. I'm going to try to end this. Anyone who wants to volunteer is welcome, but I understand if—" "I'm going," Lisa said immediately. "Me too," said Jimmy. Marcus nodded. "Count me in, Sheriff." Ezra just smiled grimly. Wouldn't miss it. They spent the day preparing. Not weapons this time. Tom understood now that guns would be useless. Instead, they gathered items from the Cherokee traditions that Lisa's aunt had described. Tobacco, sage, cedar. They built torches, collected salt, drew symbols copied from the cave walls. Tom didn't know if any of it would make a difference, but it felt important to try, to approach this with respect rather than violence. As the sun began to set, Tom went home one last time. He found Sarah in their bedroom, packing a bag. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Wherever you're going," she said firmly. "Don't even try to argue." "Sarah, I can't." 27 years, Tom.
We've been married for 27 years. You think I'm going to let you walk into that darkness alone?" Her eyes were fierce, bright with unshed tears. "If this is the end, we face it together." Tom wanted to argue, wanted to protect her, but he saw the determination in her face and knew it would be useless. So instead, he just held her, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, the smell of her hair, the sound of her breathing. "I love you," he whispered. "I know. I love you too. Now let's go end this." They met at the station as full darkness fell. Tom, Sarah, Lisa, Jimmy, Marcus, and Ezra. 6 people against creatures older than recorded history. Tom looked at each of them, saw the fear in their eyes, but also the courage. These were good people, the best people. "No one has to do this," Tom said one final time. "We can still—" "Sheriff," Lisa interrupted gently, "we're wasting time. Let's go." The drive to Cave Hollow was silent. They took 2 trucks, their headlights cutting through the mountain darkness. Tom kept glancing at the trees on either side of the road, half expecting to see those tall, skeletal figures watching from the shadows. But the forest was empty, or seemed to be. They parked at the trailhead and hiked in by torchlight. The path felt different at night, more sinister. Every shadow seemed to hold menace, every crack of a branch made them jump. But they pressed on, and after an hour they stood once again at the entrance to Cave Hollow. The clicking sound was loud now, echoing from the depths. An invitation, or a warning. Tom lit one of the ceremonial torches they'd prepared, the smoke from the sage and cedar creating a pungent cloud around them.
Then, holding the torch high, he stepped into the cave. The passage seemed longer in the dark, the walls pressing in from all sides. They walked in single file, Tom in the lead, Sarah right behind him with her hand on his shoulder. The clicking grew louder with each step until it seemed to come from everywhere at once, a rhythmic percussion that matched Tom's hammering heartbeat. They emerged into the great chamber, and Tom stopped so suddenly that Sarah bumped into him. Because the chamber wasn't empty anymore. There were 7 of them, 7 Tsul'kalu, standing in a semicircle around the far end of the chamber. They were all slightly different sizes, ranging from maybe 10 feet to an enormous one that had to be 15 feet tall. Their pale skins seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, and their multiple eyes tracked the humans with predatory focus. The largest one stepped forward, its movements fluid and wrong. It tilted its head, studying them, and then it spoke. Not in words exactly, but in sounds that formed meaning directly in Tom's mind. "Why do you come here, little ones? We are not finished feeding." Tom stepped forward, holding the torch high. His voice was steady despite the terror coursing through him. "We come to offer you an exchange, a bargain." The creature made a sound that might have been laughter, a chittering click that echoed off the walls. "You have nothing we want except your life. We offer you 6 lives, freely given, willing sacrifices. In exchange, you take no more from our people. You return to your sleep satisfied. The cycle ends here." The Tsul'kalu were silent for a long moment. Then the largest one moved closer, so close that Tom could see the texture of its skin, like wax that had partially melted and reformed. Its breath smelled of copper and earth. "Why would we accept this? We are patient. We will take what we need regardless."
"Because we're offering something you've never had before," Lisa said, stepping up beside Tom. "Willing offerings instead of hunting. Doesn't that satisfy your hunger more completely? The Cherokee understood this. They made offerings, performed rituals. They gave you respect. We're offering you the same." The creature studied Lisa for a long moment. Then it turned its head toward the others, and Tom heard that clicking communication pass between them, a discussion in a language that predated human speech. Finally, the largest Tsul'kalu turned back to him. "The old ones understood. They honored the deep places. They honored us. You are the first of the new ones to show such wisdom in many generations." It moved to the center of the chamber, to the carved depression Lisa had seen in the earlier drawing. As it stepped into the depression, the stone began to glow with that same pale light that emanated from the creature's eyes. 7 lives we need to complete this cycle.
5 we have already taken. You offer 6 more. This is acceptable. But know this, little ones. If you break your word, if you flee, we will take 14 more before we sleep. Your entire town will feed our hunger." "We understand," Tom said. "We give our word. We won't run." The creature made that clicking laugh again. "Words are wind, but the deep places remember. They always remember. If you lie, we will rise again in your children's lifetimes, and we will take everything." Tom felt Sarah's hand slip into his. He squeezed it tight, then turned to look at his people one last time. Jimmy, barely 30, who'd always wanted to be a cop like his father. Marcus, with 3 kids at home. Lisa, brilliant and brave. Ezra, who'd lived a long life but deserved to see its natural end. And Sarah, his wife, his love, who deserved so much more than this dark cave at the end. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Don't be," Sarah said softly. "You saved them. You saved everyone."
That's what heroes do. The other Tsul'kalu moved forward, forming a circle around the 6 humans. They began to make sounds, harmonics that thrummed in Tom's chest and made his bones ache. The stone beneath their feet grew warm, then hot. The pale light intensified until it was almost blinding. Tom felt something pulling at him, not physically, but deeper. Like something was reaching into his chest and pulling out threads of light. He looked down and saw them, actual visible strands of luminescence emerging from his body, from all of them, floating up toward the waiting Tsul'kalu. It didn't hurt exactly. It was more like feeling everything drain away. Warmth, sensation, memory. He felt his childhood slipping away, birthday parties and scraped knees. His first day at the police academy. His wedding day. Sarah in white, smiling like sunrise. All of it flowing out of him like water through open fingers. His last thought, before the darkness took him completely, was that he hoped it was enough. He hoped the people would be safe. He hoped Dylan and Rebecca and all the others hadn't died in vain. Then there was nothing. The sun rose over Harlan County on a cold morning in late January. In Cave Hollow, at the entrance to an ancient cavern system, rescue teams found 6 bodies arranged in a circle. Sheriff Tom Brennan, his wife Sarah, Deputy Lisa Chen, Deputy Jimmy Watts, Deputy Marcus Cole, and a local man named Ezra Stone. They looked peaceful, like they were sleeping. The medical examiner would later note that they appeared to have died of complete systemic failure. Every organ simply stopped working simultaneously. There was no medical explanation. The disappearances stopped that day. No more people vanished from the forests. The clicking sounds in the night faded away. The forest came alive again with birdsong and the rustle of small animals. The town mourned their sheriff and his people.
They were buried with full honors, their sacrifice remembered. A monument was erected in front of the courthouse, 6 names carved in granite, and beneath them the words, "They gave everything." In the weeks that followed, Anna Whitfield slowly recovered enough to speak of what had happened. She told anyone who would listen about the sheriff's courage, about his decision to face the darkness to save his people. Most folks thought she was traumatized, inventing stories to cope with the horror she'd experienced. But the old-timers, the ones who remembered the stories their grandparents told, they nodded knowingly and spoke in whispers about the old ways, the deep places, and the price that sometimes had to be paid. Jenny Price's body was never found, nor were any of the others who'd been taken. Some folks said they were still down there in the caves, that the Tsul'kalu had kept them somehow. Others said they'd been taken to whatever deep place these creatures came from, somewhere beneath the roots of the mountains, where human understanding couldn't follow. Marcus Cole's son, Tommy Cole, grew up listening to stories about his father's bravery. When he turned 21, he applied to the police academy.
On his application, where it asked why he wanted to be a law enforcement officer, he wrote, "Because my father showed me that the job means standing between the darkness and the people you love, no matter the cost." He was appointed sheriff of Harlan County at age 35, 43 years after his father's death. On his first day, he placed a photograph on his desk, his father, Sheriff Brennan, and the rest of the team, taken at a department barbecue the summer before they died. They were smiling, unaware of what was coming. Happy. Tommy kept that photo there as a reminder. The mountains were beautiful, but they were old. And old places remembered. Old places held secrets. And sometimes, those secrets had teeth.
Every 73 years, give or take. Tommy did the math. If the cycle held true, if the pattern continued, that Tsul'kalu would rise again in 2092. He'd be 83 years old then, if he lived that long. He probably wouldn't see it, but his children might. His grandchildren certainly would. So he kept his father's files, kept the records, kept the story alive. He trained his deputies not just in procedure and law, but in the history of the county. The real history, including the parts that seem impossible. He made sure every officer knew about Cave Hollow, about the cycles, about what had happened in January 2019. "You think people believe it?" his deputy asked him once. Tommy looked out his office window at the mountains, their peaks touched with snow, beautiful and eternal, and deeply, deeply old. "Doesn't matter if they believe it," he said. "What matters is that someone remembers, someone watches, someone's ready when the clicking starts again." Because that was the thing about the Tsul'kalu, about all the old things that lived in the deep places. They were patient. They could wait. They had all the time in the world. But so did the people who remembered, the watchers, the ones who stood between the darkness and the light. Tom Brennan had taught them that. In his last act, in his sacrifice, he'd shown them what it meant to be a guardian. Not just of law, not just of order, but of the very survival of his people. And that lesson echoed down through the years, passed from father to son, from sheriff to sheriff. A torch held high in the darkness, never quite extinguishing. Because in 73 years, the clicking would start again. And when it did, someone would be there to face it. Someone who remembered. Someone who was ready. The mountains kept their secrets, but the people kept their vigil. And in that ancient balance, fragile as morning mist, but strong as stone, there was hope.
Not that the horror would never return. It would. That was the nature of the cycle, the price of living in these old hills. But that when it did, there would be heroes willing to pay the cost. Just as there always had been, just as there always would be, until the mountains themselves crumbled to dust, and the deep places finally, mercifully, forgot how to hunger.